Well, the media is going to sound like a broken record for the next week as the midterms approach, blaming Donald Trump and Republicans 24/7 for that LGBT activist who attacked Nancy Pelosi's husband in his house while she was out of town. He was an illegal alien, by the way. Of course, should have been deported a long time ago. Not one of the 25 or 35 million illegals who have come in through the southern border, surprisingly. He actually came in from Canada, but then overstayed his visa. Long overstayed his visa. And of course, he must have had numerous encounters with the police over the past several years and should have been arrested and detained then and deported. And so, of course, the media is attacking Marjorie Taylor Greene for pointing that out, that, yes, the Democrats really are to blame for the Nancy Pelosi attack because their sanctuary city policies allowed him to remain illegally in this country for years. And Max Boot over at the Washington Post, an Operation Mockingbird asset who pretends to be a conservative, but all he does is just complain about conservatives and the Republican Party 24/7, says, don't accept the GOP's framing of the assault on Paul Pelosi as evidence of a problem plaguing both sides of the aisle. Oh, the Democrats and Antifa and Black Lives Matter, they're not violent at all. Political violence in America is being driven primarily by the far right, not the far left. Yesterday on MSNBC, Andrea Mitchell surprisingly admitted the obvious fact that numerous Republicans have been victims or targets of leftist violence. And then her name started trending on Twitter from so many people demanding that MSNBC fire her for surprisingly doing her job and actually reporting the obvious truth.
Let me just repeat that Republicans have been targeted. Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Alito mentioned this. There have been death threats. Susan Collins, talk about the protection at one's home. So it's both sides.
Actually, to be fair, the political violence in the United States is almost always perpetrated from someone on the left. Like when a gunman opened fire on Republicans practicing softball and almost killed Steve Scalise. And then Scott Pelley on the CBS Evening News that night said that it was, to some degree, self-inflicted. Yes, I guess he just brought it on himself because he supports the reincarnation of Adolf Hitler, Donald Trump. Or like when that Black Lives Matter activist, Micah Xavier Johnson, opened fire on a bunch of police officers during a Black Lives Matter march in Dallas, Texas in 2016, killing something like a half a dozen of them. Another story that just got swept under the rug immediately to never be mentioned again in the media. And right now, at the moment that I'm recording this video, the hashtag #TrumpIsDead is trending on Twitter, with Democrats expressing their hopes and dreams, others expressing their disappointment after seeing it trending and then finding out that it was fake news. A lot of them are just posting fake news screenshots like this fake article from CNN, which I guess all CNN articles are fake, but this is an extra fake one. Donald Trump dead at 76. So bunch of fake headstones, more fake screenshots and fake articles of them fantasizing about Donald Trump being dead. But the left doesn't engage in heated, violent rhetoric that might incite a lunatic to act out, do they? During the 2020 summer riots for George Floyd, Black Lives Matter or Antifa brought a guillotine and put a life-size Donald Trump effigy, a doll, in the guillotine right outside of the White House. And I'm actually surprised that Newsweek covered this, but doesn't mean anybody even knows about it. Newsweek virtually gets no traffic. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. But there is video footage of it. This is literally right outside of the White House. Well, this isn't inspiring any violence. This isn't violent at all. Just the President of the United States at the time being put in a guillotine right outside of the White House. And it's not an exaggeration that the lead story on CNN and MSNBC every night in prime time and probably throughout the day, with a few rare exceptions, is January 6th. They are a broken record. I feel like I'm stuck in Groundhog Day. But we can't forget that during President Trump's inauguration in January of 2017, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa activists rioted in Washington, D.C., trying to prevent the peaceful transition of power. Most of these articles have been dumped down the memory hole, so kind of got to go to foreign news outlets like Reuters. I'm not going to show any of the footage of the riots, otherwise YouTube will probably take this video down because you're not allowed to show violent content even if you're thoroughly denouncing it. Only the mainstream media is allowed to do that. Well, they mostly encourage it, of course, but you can look them up yourself. In fact, I just saw that somebody got a strike for showing footage and denouncing it, of course, of a group of black people rioting in a restaurant. And then when they were replying to YouTube on Twitter about the strike, they literally linked to the same news report being shown in other mainstream outlets. But of course, if you're just an ordinary YouTuber, you're showing that footage, not to glorify it, but to just show how we're in a collapsing empire, you're not allowed to do that because it reflects poorly on the Democrat Party. And then there's this. The government dropped the charges against all inauguration protesters. Literally the ones who set the fires, broke all the windows, and rioted in downtown D.C. Yes, the district attorney just decided to drop all of those charges for all of those rioters. And I'm sorry that I have to keep pointing out that certain articles and tweets aren't parodies or videos, but they're not. This would seem like a parody. The government drops charges against all inauguration protesters, and the photo is real. That's the limo that they burnt down on the inauguration day in 2017. There's a real article from NBC News. The district attorney or the Justice Department decided to just throw out all the charges against those, hundreds of protesters who were arrested for trying to overthrow our democracy and stop the peaceful transfer of power. And who could forget that Jerry Nadler says that Antifa is just a myth? It's just a figment of your imagination, guys.
True. There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa? That's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online. There's fires and riots. They're throwing fireworks at federal officers. DHS is there.
It's like the penguin.
Look online. It gets crazy, Mr. Nadler.
That's just a myth. Wouldn't denounce the violence. And when Ted Cruz pointed out on The View last week that Antifa and Black Lives Matter, burned down hundreds of businesses across the country during the George Floyd riots, then Newsweek decided to fact-check him and said that that was false. The Antifa riots Cruz refers to are almost certainly protests, which followed George Floyd's death. He had a heart attack, of course. He was saying that he couldn't breathe before he was even put on the ground. If you actually watch the whole clip, the footage that they don't want you to see. Most of these occurred between May and early June 2020. Although many buildings were damaged or destroyed by fire during the protests, this did not carry on throughout the year. While protests did continue in Portland, Oregon for nearly a year, these were not all characterized by arson. Most other cities quieted down after June. Oh, and they actually Orwellianly changed this. This is not what the original article said. Surprisingly, they added a little note down there on the bottom that this article was updated to clarify the definition of Antifa and add comments from Ted Cruz's representative after they denounced this fake fact check. But the original draft of this, which I could pull up in the Wayback Machine probably, or go find a screenshot of it, but it literally said that Antifa doesn't exist. It's not an organization at all. Let me just do that. Let me pull it up on the Wayback Machine. We'll get the exact quote of what the original draft said. Okay, here's the original article. This is from the Wayback Machine because I want to be thorough. So after it says that the protests did continue in Oregon, but most cities quieted down after June, it ended by saying labeling the protests as Antifa riots is misleading too, as there is no organization or group known as such. There's no group known as Antifa. And click the thumbnails on the screen to check out some of my previous videos that you may have missed, some classic Man on the Street episodes, or petitions for crazy things. And stay tuned, and I will see you soon.